All right, all right. What's going on, everybody? Hopefully, you guys are having a great week. I am so excited about today's episode of the live Dynamite events. Man, like this week has been nuts. We have had some crazy wins for recruiting with Dynamite as well as the Boom Lab. So, as you guys jump on, I want to share some stuff that I'm really excited about before we jump in with Ben Mena, who is going to be giving us all his secrets on the podcasting side. So, I don't know if you guys saw it in the group, but we've got some heavy hitters coming in the next few weeks. Not just Ben. We have Danny Howe, who's going to be like telling us about community. We've got like social media gurus like Joel Lalgi and Stuart Mitchell, who's just like, it's just, I'm so excited about the guests that are coming up. So if you haven't subscribed and you haven't checked in and RSVP to those events, make sure you're jumping into the Boom Lab, go to the live event situation, and make sure you RSVP because we want to get as many guests in there. It's your opportunity to interact with a lot of people that are just experts in their space and get to know how to better your own recruiting practice and your own business development situation. And that's the key. So if you have anybody that you think I should have on, let me know. Ping me. Tell me what you want. Tell me who you want to come on and to share their secrets. I'll try and do my best to get them to give away the farm, if you will. So yeah, I'm excited about today. Benjamin Mena. He is the one and only person I know who has been such a big influence on the recruiting space. The way he has been, right? He's helping people understand how to bill more, become an elite recruiter. He has a podcast called the Elite Recruiter Podcast. If you haven't listened, it's one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. He's just got some really great guests on there, top billers, just a really good outlook on how to help continue helping the recruiting community just be better. And he's already like this month, he's about to break 10,000 downloads, which is huge, right? The recruiting space is small, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we might think it's like a massive space, but 10,000 downloads on a podcast is an impressive number, and averaging about 8,000 to 9,000 downloads, and that's crazy, right? And what's really cool about it is that his recruiting company, Select Source Solutions, has been just reaping in the benefits of it all, right? Getting a lot of attraction, getting a lot of views. People are getting to know him as a person, as well as the people that he works with. And doing that, him and his wife run Select Source Solutions, which is very, very close to my heart because my wife and I run A Talent. So we have very much in common in that situation. And they have done, just the two of them have done over $1 billion in government contracts in their career, right? So really, really great success story here. And I'm excited to have them on. So I'll leave you to it, Ben. Go ahead and introduce yourself. And if for the people who don't know you.
How's it going, guys? And before I get started, like hop in the comments real quick. On a 1 to 10 scale, how much has Will's content, Will's teachings, and Will's influence helped you out with your recruiting business so far?
I
Love to
appreciate
see
that,
this
Ben.
because honestly, like if you're going to listen to one of my podcasts, go back and listen to Will's. It was absolutely phenomenal. But background in the GovCon space, probably about almost 2 decades in now. So when it comes to talking about that $1 billion worth of staffed government contracts, it's across that entire like span. But I started my career like most people. I just fell into recruiting. Started at an agency, Aerotech, young, dumb, and out of school with nothing to do. And it's been the recruiting career has been a blessing and it's been a curse.
Yeah.
But over the last 2 decades, I'd say it's been way more of a blessing than anything else. I'm so grateful that I ended up in this career track because who knows where else I would have been.
Yeah, man. I totally feel that, man. Like it's one of those things where we always talk about it, right? It's no one jumped into recruiting knowing that they were going to be a recruiter. I know one person, right? I always say that I only know one person, right? And he's a fantastic recruiter. He's amazing at it. But it's an interesting place, right? Where else can you actually create that kind of change in people's lives the way that we do, but also be paid in a very lucrative way? And that's the way I kind of think about it. It's just not, this place where you can just go make money. So tell me, like, how do you think about recruiting? Like, what's your thoughts on it these days?
So it's, one of the cool things about recruiting is there are major life decisions that people go through:
Yeah.
who they marry, where they live, where they go to school, and what they do for a living. And we have such an impact on what they do for a living. Now,
Yeah.
when it comes to the GovCon space, it's one of the things, like when you're recruiting, you have to like put on a bit of a lens for you to focus on whatever mission that you're doing. In the GovCon space, many times, like I look at things like, depending on what job and what we're supporting, if the job doesn't get filled with the right person, somebody can die. Like people can get
Yeah.
killed in the GovCon
Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
So like you have to sometimes, like this took me a while in my career to learn how to like take that mission, because when you're talking to a candidate, like they hear that belief in this opportunity that you're giving them. So that's the way I look at it.
Yeah. I mean, you're literally in life and death situations, right? Secret clearance, stuff like that. Like that's huge, man. Like if like at the end of the day, you mess up, it's like
If you have like that position that doesn't get filled,
yeah.
or
Yeah.
that contract doesn't get staffed up, there are soldiers on the ground that don't have the intel.
Yep.
Bad guys can hurt them. Like all
Yeah.
sorts of different things that, it took me a while to get to that level of like, one, caring about the industry, two, caring about the missions and understanding it so well that I'm able to just like kind of like internalize it and be able to like externalize it out to the candidates.
And it helps that you like you said, you have something that you're working on that actually has a tangible effect, right? Like you can actually see the work that you're doing, which I think a lot of people don't really realize. Like I have a nursing and staffing client that I work with, and that's one of the things that we talk about quite a bit. Is like you're not just helping, you know, uh, someone find a job. You're actually helping. You got to care because, like, at the end of the day, like that's someone's grandma, that's someone's sister, like that you're working with, someone's child that the person that you're placing is going to be taken care of, and like you want to always make sure that those people are feeling good about the kind of help and staff that they're going to get, and you actually see a tangible result, but you actually get to see it, which is kind of like really cool. So
And
um,
sometimes you see it in the news, which is weird.
all right, so let's get into it. So at the end of the day, man, you run a podcast that's got a ton of views, a ton of attraction. You've created a great brand on for yourself, and what's funny about that is like that's sometimes not reflected over LinkedIn. Like we post like as a
One
content
like,
creator, yeah, you'll get like one like, right, and like it's like, oh well, is he really doing that well, like on this, like, and so people kind of have this like cynical piece of that, right? So I'm just curious, like as you've built this up in the traditional recruiting sense, like what are some of the pains and issues and challenges that you faced when you were starting up in recruiting, as well as like when you started to go into the podcast world and creating a brand for yourself?
well, let me start off on the recruiting side of the house.
Yeah.
So started off at Aerotech, great organization, great training, great everything. I have so many great things to say about them, except for the commission structure. But about 2.5 months in, they actually pulled me into an office and sat me down, and they're like, "You fucking suck. We're going to get rid of you. Like, you are the worst recruiter that we have. And the only reason why we haven't fired you is because you hit the metrics that we tell you to hit. So like
Yeah.
on paper, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. You just suck at recruiting."
Damn.
So like, I think it was like, don't laugh at this. I think it was around the same time where my car blew up. So I was taking the bus every day, like an hour and a half to and from the Aerotech office because nobody knew I didn't have a car either. So I was just like, I have nowhere else to go. I have nowhere else to do, nothing else to do. Like I can't afford it to quit and jump it, like go look for another job. So I just, went home that day, kind of drank some wine, was just like, this sucks. What am I going to do? And the next day during lunchtime, I started calling up some of the top billers. And one of the things that Aerotech does is, I think it was like every Wednesday, they sent out a list of all the top billers for every single division. So I just started cold calling them. And this is like, pre-heavy social media days. So you had no clue what's going on in the rest of the world. I think
Mhm.
LinkedIn, I'm an old dog. LinkedIn had like something like 4 million users.
Crazy,
And
right?
this is like before the content day. So I started calling them up and I was just like, "Hey, like I'm new. Like, what are you doing? How are you so good?" And so many of them gave me some time, gave me some advice. And I just started kind of emulating what they did and what they told me to do. And over time, luckily I was one of the top billers, like typically like top 10 or typically top 3 in my division because of that advice because of like what they told me, the time that they spent with me. And if it wasn't for those people, I mean, one, if it wasn't for those phone calls that I went and did,
Mm.
who knows where I would be. Secondly, if it wasn't for those people that were willing to spend their time, and one of the crazy things about top billers, they're most across the board, they're such an open book. They're like, oh yeah, here's what I do, here's what I do, da 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 da.
Yeah.
It's one of those things like, yeah, we're all like technically competitors at the end of the day,
Yeah.
but so much of the community is there helping each other get better. And because of them, they really just kickstarted my entire recruiting career, went internal for a little while. And yes, when we talk about the $1 billion of government contracts, that also is on the internal side of the house. So it's not like I'm sitting on $100 million of commission just from GovCon.
Yeah.
But it's really those big billers that really just helped me at the end of the day solidify my career.
Mentors are crazy, right? Like I just literally wrote about this today, which is good. It's a cool segue there. I mean, at the end of the day, if you don't have a good mentor or you don't have anybody in your company that you can look up to, you got to go find one. And that's what the Boom Lab's all about too, right? Like there's so many billers on the Boom Lab. Like people don't realize like the billers that are in that group. It's a small group. Like now's the time to interact with them and like get on the chats, because you'll find that good billers and people who are actually like really good at their job have no secrets. That's the whole point of why I built the Boom Lab, right? It's like, let's not keep it a secret anymore. Like this is how you build, like this is how you do things. So I think that's awesome. So when did you like kind of come to the conclusion that podcasting and branding and going down this path, and I know, because doing the content game, it's very difficult to do, and it's one of those things that you get in your head. And about what made you take that psychotic leap?
So first of all, I suck at writing, which the more I write, the worse it gets. If it wasn't for like Grammarly or Microsoft Word, I can't even put two like sentences together without 5 misspellings. So like writing content has always been a struggle. Secondly, like this is like going back to the COVID days where the world shut down and like communication shut down, the office was shut down. So it was just like kind of like, well, let me do what everybody else is doing. Let me start a podcast. And it originally started as a recession proof leadership podcast. And then I cut my first episode. And then all of a sudden, like half the world was doing better in this recession. I was like, well, I can't really call it recession proof when things are rocking and rolling everywhere. So it went back into the idea, like some of the questions I asked in the podcast were all focused on recruiting. And I was like, let's just make this recruiting. Like I remember back at Aerotech, those big billers that like saved me on the time that I needed it most. Maybe I should do that with, just call up some of my recruiting friends, ask them some questions, share their stories. And that's kind of like where it started. By the second episode, it was the Elite Recruiter podcast. And when you're sitting there building a podcast, like one of the crazy things, it's kind of cool, like seeing that close to 10,000 monthly downloads. Man, I was excited when I got that first download. That wasn't me. I had that one download, which was me. And like when somebody else downloaded it and found it, I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. But what was the question again? Sorry, I got sidetracked.
Yeah, no, you're answering the question. It's it was what got you into starting the Elite Recruiter podcast, and at the end of the day, what were some of those challenges at first? And you mentioned it, right? Like at the end of the day, like it's a scary thing because you're putting yourself out there, right? And you're trying to figure out what's kind of going to resonate with your audience and like who your audience really is, and then kind of what I'm hearing from you is you started, and then you adjusted and you molded and you said, okay, like this is the path that we're going to go. Is that like kind of a good assessment of what you're saying?
So for the listeners out there, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, I recorded my first episode on Zoom. It probably took me a month and a half before I published it because I was partially waiting for everything to try to be perfect. And two, I was trying to learn all the technology to be a quote unquote podcaster, like Adobe this or Audacity and this. And it literally, I sucked at it all. I think I spent 20 hours trying to figure out some of the tech before I finally just gave up and like figured it out. And even then it was just like, thank God for Fiverr. There's great way, really, there's great places where you can outsource some of this work.
Yeah.
But, I was like trying to do it all on the budget that we had. And like, I think just trying to learn a new skill set was probably one of the hardest things when I wanted to try to give a valuable thing back to the community.
Did you have a goal in the beginning? Like, a lot of times, a lot of the things that people are trying to do right now is really try to get business development, right? Was there any sort of business development goal at the end of this, or were you just really trying to serve or and solve problems for the community?
At the at the start of it, it was really just to kind of share some stories of the people that I knew. Like that was the pure number one goal. And then I was just like, hey, I think I listened. It was like a Gary V book, like Jab Jab Punch Punch or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe it was his first book. I was like, just go out there. So I actually set a goal for myself, and it's taken like 2 years to get there. Of like, hey, let's go build 100 episodes and really just sit back and see where we're at. And actually, this week was episode number 100.
Nice, congratulations, man.
Thank you. And it's one of those things, like podcasting is hard, and there's a reason why most people never make it past the 10th episode. But one of the cool things.
Oh, you went out. Oh, there you
Can
go.
you hear me?
Are you back? Yeah, you're back. Okay.
So one of the cool things about podcasting is I now have like easy 1,000 hours of content that I can share over and over and over. And
Yeah.
one of the awesome things about it is I didn't realize it was going to be such a benefit for my business at the beginning. So when people see me like on LinkedIn and see me on the social media platforms, it's created this like omnipresence where this is going to sound bad, which I probably should be doing BD every day. Well, I'm so sorry. Should be doing it every week, but we really haven't had to really chase business because of one, the work that we've done in this space, and two, like there's so much content that we're out there. So like when I do chat with somebody, 99% of the time, like, oh yeah, da 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 da, they already know like my story. They already know the things that I'm doing. They're already knowing the things that I'm talking about.
That's crazy because like what's nuts about it, and I think a lot of the thing I'm pulling from this too is that your podcast isn't even for necessarily for the GovCon space. It's for the recruiting place, and at the end of the day, like you're talking about stuff that you know and that you're very passionate about, and a lot of times you're not even the one talking because you're the one that has guests. You're the host, right? So people know who you are, and you've built this omnipresence around your business that now has transitioned into revenue and brought in companies, right? Like you have an inbound marketing platform essentially, right? Or solution. So what's really cool about that is like, I think a lot of people think like that if they're going to start a podcast, that's got to be like very, very focused, or it's got to be for that, like that specific, audience. And what you're saying is not necessarily, it just has to be something that you're passionate about and that you can figure out how to transition it or use it to market your business. Is that what I'm getting from you?
That's exactly what you're getting. I will say that I actually started a Web3 podcast too.
Oh, really?
Yep, and like I sunsetted that a while back, but of course, like when Web3 went down, but one of the things I actually was doing was looking at exploring leaving GovCon. Because everybody, it's like grass always looks a little greener on the other side of the fence, kind of thing.
Yep.
So started a Web3 podcast called Decentralized Careers, and started hosting leaders in the Web3 space, and like tell their story. And real quick, one of the coolest things about having like an industry focused podcast, every company wants to get their leaders out there and create content. And here's the thing that I wanted to get, and we'll probably like recap a little later. And this was like talking about a BD structure. How many times, hey, think about this if you're listening to this, how many times have you gotten a sales email and just hit delete? How many times have you gotten hey, let's book 15 minutes?
Yep.
And you just kind of look at like, I don't have 15 minutes. Like I don't have like, what are you going to sell me?
Yep.
But when I reached out to some of these like Web3 leaders with big companies, hey, I have a podcast called Decentralized Careers. Yes, it's new. Love to interview you. Here's kind of some of the things I would love to interview you about. Would you like to be a guest on the show? Yeah, people just said yes.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, we're doing it right now, right? Like, so we don't have a podcast; it's a webinar, right? But at the end of the day, like, it's crazy. Like, I actually got a hold of Will Allred, who's the CEO or the co-founder of Lavender, right? Yesterday, we had a great conversation. Like, I cannot wait till he jumps on because he's actually talking about him and I actually talked about the fact that like what all the emails that he gets from recruiters and like how bad they are and like what he's responded to and how he's actually selected recruiters. So there's going to be a lot of value in that, especially because people are still in the tech market. And one of the big takeaways actually was, Will was so willing to jump on and have a conversation. And then the thing I incentivize on my end is like, hey, look, like, you're going to jump on a webinar. It's going to be like 10 to 30 people. Like, it's not going to be that big, especially right now. But hopefully, if we, advertise it well, it'll get bigger and bigger and bigger. But here's what you get, right? You're not just getting to pitch to your audience, but you also are going to get my content, right? I'm going to give it to you. You get it all for free. I'm going to have my editor edit it for you. You're going to have all these shorts. You can do what you want with it. And that's like the handshake, right? It's like, hey, like, take the time, now you have free content. Cool. And Will doesn't even need that content because he has an editor on staff. But I think that's really fun because if you actually do it and you actually create great quality content and you actually can have an editor or somebody on Fiverr or Fiverr or however we ever say it, like, you whatever you're doing, like, if you could do it and provide some value to them at the end of the day, like, that's the key, right?
Yep.
And that's cool. So yeah, I completely agree with you on that.
And the craziest thing is, like, by episode 4, I actually had of that Web3 podcast, I actually had hiring managers at other companies reaching out to me to chat about, like, they need help with recruiting.
Yeah.
So like having a podcast, like, really what a podcast is like when you have a guest on there, you're really shining the spotlight on the guests, on them, what they're doing, their story, all the stuff. But because you're shining a spotlight on them, you're getting a spotlight shine back on yourself too.
Yeah. Yep. It's there's like a Confucius saying or something like that. It was like learned, it's something about serving the other person, like, don't focus on yourself, serve on the other person, and in doing so you actually serve yourself, kind of thing. So I completely agree with that. That's exactly what it is. You're not trying to, if you come at things in a way where you're trying to just help a community or help the growth of another person, like, then you'll actually get the return at the end of the day, right? And that's that spotlight, the part that you're talking about. And I love it. I love it.
And on the industry focused podcasts, like, like what I do is typically, introduction, how'd you get into space, talk about like the meat, which is the story of the company. And then I always try to do like a little bit of actionable advice on the backside. And during that, like, I actually ask them recruiting questions like, hey, where are you finding your best people? How are you recruiting your best people? What are some of the struggles that your team has had with recruiting that you would give advice to other people? So literally, like, they're telling you all their pain points, secrets, and everything. And then like a week later, like, hey, I know you guys, I saw that you guys had some openings. Love to chat with you about how we could support you guys.
Love it. That's huge. Let's get tangible, man. Let's get tactical, if you will. So, at the end of the day, people are thinking about, like, how do I get more inbound? How do I get more outbound? How do I get more marketing done? And, that's what this is all about, right? How does if you were to start today, first and foremost, if you were to start today from the very beginnings, like, knowing what you know now, how would you go about going and starting a podcast, and one that specifically is profit oriented for your business?
So with everything I know now, it is so much easier to start a podcast now than 2 years ago, because there's so many tech tools out there to make your life easier. Like, you can literally have a successful industry podcast. And real quick, the definition of success is like, 1, impacting somebody else, and 2, like, what is it doing for your business? Mm-hmm. Like, if it's 5 downloads, but you now have 5 new recs, that's an absolute win. So some of the things, like what tech tools, like actionable tech tools, Riverside, it's the platform that we're using right here. It does such a great job when it comes to video content, and you're able to pull like content off it. There's also some cool stuff like Magic Clips. So like, actually on the back end, like, once we get done, all Will has to do is literally hit Magic Clips, and in about 30 seconds, it has, using AI, can pull some clips, add some captions in there. So you can literally just download and post on social media. It's freaking
Stop giving away my secrets, Ben.
Gosh, sorry. You asked for that. Another like awesome platform when it comes to editing is, there's so somebody that like sucks at technology like I do. There's a platform called Descript. And what it does is it actually, you drop your audio file into there, or your video file. It does videos too. And it transcribes your entire podcast like a Word document, and you can edit it like a Word document. So I can get rid of I say and a lot. So by the time you guys have actually listened to it, I've probably edited about half of my knows out there, or some of the ums. But it is literally just like you can get that done in about 45 minutes, and then just like hit export, hit publish, and go from there. When it comes to creating video content, there's like a bunch of great tools that you can literally just drop a video into, and it uses artificial intelligence to get cuts. Yes, an editor is always better, but if you can't afford an editor, there are so many amazing AI tech tools out there. Like one of my favorites is a thing called Opus Pro. You literally drop the video in there. It like does a good job like highlighting who's talking. So like the video focuses on who's talking, transcribes it, and does a phenomenal job transcribing it, and then gives it a score on like how well it's going to do on social media.
That's like, honestly, Opus is really great. I've used Opus quite a bit, and what you're saying is like, before and I think one of the big things I've gotten from this is don't wait to like have like a crazy production or the best camera or any of that stuff. Just get started, right? I mean, I think that's a big part of it. And to your point, there's so many tools and so many services out there that you can do this on the cheap. Before, like you said, like when you wanted to create a podcast, you had to, go all in and put like tons of money down. Like it cost money to do it. Now you could literally go buy a $30 microphone. This is, I think, a $40 microphone, and just start going. You just need your laptop and computer and some guests, right? So I think that's a big part of it. And don't beat yourself up, because you're just learning, you're getting started, and you probably hear some, for example, my gardener's out there mowing the lawn. I don't know if you guys hear it. Sorry. But it's at the end of the day, like stuff happens, and like you can always figure out ways to go around it and just give value to the market that you're serving. The question I have for you though is, now that you are in the production stage, you've gotten through the creative process, you've gone through those like those humps that I think a lot of people are going to go through. What would you tell people, as they, or what are some humps that they can like expect along the way? Like what are some things that they should be looking for and be prepared for when they start podcasting?
You're going to do stuff like forget to hit record. You're going to do stuff like, so I have a decently fancy mic, and this like happened just a few weeks ago. I was interviewing a leadership from a company called Seekout, which is awesome. And guess what? I had to have him jump off and jump on like multiple times because I thought like something was broken. I accidentally, when I moved my mic, I hit the mute button. And so like this poor guy, like the poor guy, just like, when you're ready for an interview and there's technical issues, and I just felt so bad. Like that that happened on like just a few weeks ago. Background noise is a killer. I've learned like I've had to actually recut a few interviews because the background noise was so bad that I couldn't even save the audio file using something like Adobe's. Yeah. So like you're going to run into stuff, you're going to run into challenges. It's going to stress you out, but at the end of the day, if you can get a good interview out, it's something that adds value for your guests and for the community. That's what's really going to like work out.
Yeah, I want to start opening it up for questions for people. If anybody has any questions for Ben or for myself, tap in here, but I'm going to keep going on this. So, one of the big things is like there's vanity metrics, right? Everybody looks at likes, downloads, all that stuff. As a content creator myself now, I have come to get very used to duds, right? How are you looking at your metrics? And is there a measurable kind of piece that you're looking at in your business development process, or anything that you're looking at that says that this is becoming more and more successful outside of just like the downloads or some of the vanity metrics like the likes and shares and all that stuff? What do you look for?
So this is going to sound dumb. The thing that I look for is if somebody that I've never met somehow runs across my podcast and shoots me a message saying, because of some of the guests that you had on, I've started my recruiting career. I've started my own recruiting business, and I've been able to make placements due to the advice that they've given.
Mm. Mm. I love that. Yeah, I mean, I didn't think that. So, just as an example, guys, and here's the funny thing about this. Like, I don't know about you. Do you listen to your podcast? Do you listen to your content?
So I actually, one of the things I love doing is I go through the editing process. Like I don't want to say I love editing because it takes time, but it's one of the things like I go through and I'm the one doing it on just script.
Yeah.
So I go back and re-listen to every single podcast before it goes live.
Wow. I absolutely hate listening to myself. So, like, after our podcast, Ben, and like I remember when I got off that podcast, I walked out of the room and I looked at my wife and I go, I don't know if I like that one. That one was that I was because I was trying out some new material, right? So like some of the stuff that we were talking about was like the mentality piece and going through, chip on your shoulder stuff. And like if you haven't listened to the podcast, I've been told it's really good. So, but it's funny because I walked away and I looked at my wife and I was like, I don't know if that was the best podcast, and I feel bad because I got on the Ben's show and I don't think he's going to get a lot of attraction on this. He's probably going to get some flack. And what's
funny is like you've gotten a lot of like positive feedback from that.
Massive. Like I was like I was shocked. Literally your podcast is the number one podcast people refer to for me. So like it is so funny to me because I like look at there's plenty of podcasts where I'm like, oh yeah, like I crushed it on that one. Like, and I walked out and then crickets, right? And it was just like nothing. But with yours, I've gotten a few clients from it. I've gotten, people reaching out. I've gotten a ton of growth on the newsletter from it. Like, so and a lot of you probably listening right now are from that podcast, which is insane to me. So I think one of the big things like to think about too is like, just get it out. Like, don't over analyze it, right? And I think that's like the hard part as a perfectionist like myself and somebody who's like constantly dealing with my own internal issues. So like it's like, man, like you just got to get it out because you don't know who it's going to resonate with. And that's the fun part about this whole thing. It's all discovery, right? So we got a question from Chris. He says, what are some good ways to promote a new podcast? He just launched his podcast a few weeks ago and he set up the link. So if you guys want to go check his show out, it's the Chris White Show. I'll make sure I add it into the community so people can get to it. But Ben, what do you think?
So some of the things to start off with is make sure your podcast is like the description and everything is like very focused on SEO. So if like somebody's typing in like, business development, like your podcast, like if you want to launch or grow a business, Chris, like add a lot more entrepreneurship stuff in there. So that way it gets picked up on the SEO side of the house. Share it across like different social media platforms. And one of the coolest things now is if you're doing video also, drop your video into like places like GetMunch and Opus Pro. Let it cut a bunch of things because that like one podcast, like I'm looking at your last one that's about 28 minutes long. You'll probably easily get about 10 AI generated video clips from Opus Pro that you could easily share. So that's one of the other things. Also, like when you're sitting there sharing, tag whoever it is that you did the podcast with on social media. And like I actually send a nice email. I'd be happy to share that with you. Like once we get off the podcast of like, hey, here's the links, here's this and that. So I actually give people the raw videos in case there's anything that they want to do with it for their own promotion. And if you have made any like clips, share it with them too. Because they're like people are happy to promote themselves. That's one of the reasons why they got on the podcast. But also when you have guests on, don't expect your guests to bring in like more views, if that makes sense. Like you're opening up yourself into their network, which is nice. It's awesome. It's getting their network into your network is amazing. But I also don't want to ever like pressure myself thinking that I need all these like hits and downloads from the guests.
Yes.
But yeah, I would cross in like every single social media platform. There's a few different places like Podpage, which actually is a really cool podcast website. And like, it's one of my dumb discoveries recently. We spent probably about 5 months trying to build non-techie people, build a website for the podcast, and literally found this place called Podpage. And like within 30 seconds, it did better than what we did in 6 months on Squarespace.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I didn't even know that even existed.
So, but yeah, it's super cool. And what it does is it literally just downloads, like the second my podcast goes live, it automatically pulls it in from the RSS feed or whatever the RSS feed is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the other things is like just on the newsletter side, like I mean, obviously I'm not a podcast, but it's very similar, right? Like we're trying to create content that is going to resonate and get to people. Like, um, there's also stuff like repurpose.io too. If you've ever, I don't know if you've tried that out. I'm like just getting in the mix of this right now, but repurpose is really great because what you could do is you could literally put in your, like you said, you put in your Descript or you put in like the video and it'll transcribe it and then it'll determine based on all of your platforms like what's going to be best fit for that. It like breaks it up into written content and it's really cool. So like obviously there's AI's really making a big impact on everything from content creation to recruiting, right? It's definitely proliferating through the industries, but at the end of the day, like don't just depend on that though. I think that's another part that when I talk about AI and automation, don't just sit there and say, okay, that's good enough. Use the AI to get to the starting point and then like play around with it so that way you have something that's great content and like that's going to resonate with your audience. I'd also tap into understanding, like really understanding who your audience is. Like do a couple episodes. This is something that we did with our newsletter, right? Like our initial newsletter was all about AI automation and copywriting. That was our tagline, right? The intersection of all that, right? So, and what we quickly realized was after a few episodes and after a few conversations with our audience, it was, hey, like what's the actual pain that they want to, what do people want to hear about? And people resoundingly across the board, business development. It was like the number one thing. Business development, business development. I'm having trouble getting leads. I'm dealing with this in my market. My market's dying and all this stuff, right? Like, and a lot of it came from people who were very niched. So one of the key points that I talk about all the time is like, don't let your niche be your identity, and then like learn how to jump into new markets and learn how to expand, right? So that has been where we're focusing on now, and it's been really great because in the last month, just even the last month, we've doubled our newsletter subscriptions, and which is crazy, right? And again, it's not a massive amount of people, but it's very targeted. Every single person that's on that newsletter, every single person that's in Boom Lab are people that I can help and I can serve. So don't just think about it in terms of like where you can create this podcast, but how you can distribute it out, and then start targeting your audience, getting to know them a little bit more, segment them, figure out what they're looking for, so that way you can continue to bring on new guests or have different conversations, or you can pivot conversations to what specifically those needs are, right? So that would be my advice. Would you agree with that, Ben?
I absolutely definitely agree, and it's one of the things. Like if you're looking, like we've talked about the identity like a bunch of times, Will, and like
Mm-hmm.
one of the things about in recruiting is sometimes you have to completely shed and shift your identity to something new.
Yeah.
Building
Yeah.
a podcast is an easy, quick way to shift your identity into a new space if you want to. Like even like don't make this like a goal of 100 episodes. Like if you're jumping into a new space, make it a goal of like 10 episodes. Make
Yeah.
it a goal of like 25 episodes. And it really can easily quickly set you as an authority, because how many emails are you sending? How many emails are you sending? How many emails are getting deleted? How do you set yourself apart in
Yep.
2023 and 2024 being authentic? And you could be authentic through a podcast.
Yeah, I think podcasting, newsletters, communities, I think they're very big USPs or unique selling propositions for people that people don't even realize that like it's an untapped market in a real way. Like just think about this, like podcasts are being developed all over the place right now. And it's so funny to me because it's like everybody's jumping on a podcast or newsletter, right? And so it's like, like it's cool because it's happening and it's validating what's actually happening, right? But two, it's like people see that and they're like, oh well, there's too many podcasts out there's too many newsletters, and that's not the truth. Like so don't get that in your head too, like when you're looking at, hey, should I do a podcast, should I do a newsletter, should I do a community, whatever it is, like just focus on giving the best value you possibly can, and then like that audience will naturally join in an organic way, and then you can start figuring out what works and what doesn't, and just keep resonating, right? And just keep getting that word out and keep putting that effort in. I think that's a big part of it. Don't give up, like, but it has to be a part of your long-term solution, not something that you're just jumping on because it's the thing to do right now. Like, don't, like, what I wouldn't do is if you're going to start a podcast or a newsletter, like, don't do it just so that you can hit that trend. do it because it's like a part of your marketing goal for the next 5 to 10 years, right? And like that you can and like really actually commit to. And it's hard. It's a very difficult thing to do. So it's not an easy task. So you got to know that you're going to do it, and grind through it and be resilient through it. The other thing I would also tap into on like trying to promote this stuff as well is like borrow audiences. So I am huge about it. I literally just wrote an article on it. If you guys haven't checked it out, the latest release of RWD, it's part 4 of the Go to Market series. And one of the things that I talk about is Nearbound, right? It's a fairly new concept, but it's not really that new. It's just like they've termed it a new term for it. But Nearbound Go to Market is literally just going to partners and people who have influence and borrowing trust, right? So I did it like Ben, I did it with you, right? I've done it across podcast after podcast after podcast that I jump on. I don't own a podcast, right? So if you don't even want to start a podcast, but you're thinking about like, hey, how do I get my name out there? Start thinking about how you can borrow and Nearbound that marketing, right? So find podcasts that are really good, have a good pitch, tell them why you'd be a good guest, and then you can go into, some of the cool, like unique viewpoints that you might have that's going to help their audience, right? Because you're giving to them at the end of the day. And that was my whole stick with you is like, I want to make sure I give you the best, you and your audience, the best I can possibly give them. So I'm going to go deep. Right. I wanted to go deep there and like, and it was all new messaging and people loved it. Right. So it's cool.
And that kind of goes into like when you're sitting there having a podcast guest, like think about this. If you're hosting like a leader for a space company, their LinkedIn circle is all other leaders in the space company.
That's it.
So like when you're sharing stuff, tagging them, it's now showing up in their circle. Mm-hmm. And now you're borrowing their circle.
That's it. You're borrowing trust. So borrow trust, guys. But also deliver, right? Don't just like borrow trust and then give them like make sure your stuff's in line. Don't like the biggest mistake I think people do is like go into this and they're like, oh, I'm going to get a bunch of leads, and then they can't deliver. If you can't deliver, like you need to figure something out. Like
it's a long game. Like podcasting, newsletters, and that kind of stuff. I almost like equate it to farming. Like when you're out there doing the day-to-day BD work or the day-to-day recruiting work, you're out there hunting every single day.
That's right.
But what podcasts and content and oh my God, there's a LinkedIn article that still brings me business that like I wrote 3 years ago. Like that is farming content that you're planting seeds for another day.
That's it. All right, man. Well, we're coming close to the end here. Any other questions before we jump off, guys? All right. Nope. Okay. So, Ben, how do people find you? What? Obviously, you're on the Boom Lab. They can reach out to you there. But like, what are some other ways people can connect with you?
So you can hop on to Spotify or Apple Podcasts. The Elite Recruiter Podcast is the easiest way. Another thing, you can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I'm not as active on TikTok or Twitter like I should be, but there's only so much time for so many social media platforms. But yeah, it's happy to help, happy to answer some questions. I think going from 2023, 2024, and 2025, there's going to be such a plethora of AI generated content, and like podcasting and like newsletters and stuff like that is going to be the thing that really sets yourself apart. And you have to think about ways that you can differentiate yourself from the rest of the world. What is something that you're strong at? What is a way that you could tell your story or share somebody else's story? Because like there's so much AI stuff that you're going to be like fighting the AI noise, but people are desperately looking for authentic shit.
Yep. Make yourself more human. It's a big part of the coaching that we do is, you want to put in automation, you want to put in AI, you want to do all this stuff. But at the end of the day, the AI is just there to help you be more human, right? Like, so you could do more human activities like podcasting, right? Like connecting with people. That's stuff that like that AI just can't do, right? At least not yet, right? So again, guys, I really appreciate everybody who joined in today, and thank you for being such active members of the Boom Lab. Be sure to check out Ben's podcast. Check out Chris White's podcast, Chris White Show. So there you go, Chris. And if you haven't checked it out, check it out now. So
I want to say one more thing.
Yeah.
If you've gotten any value in the last month from Will's stuff, invite one more person to this group.
Oh,
Because like that one person that you invited to this group can completely change their entire career.
dude, thank you. You just made my heart all warm and fuzzy. I really appreciate that. But yes, and invite them to Ben's podcast too. Join Ben's podcast. Subscribe now. But yeah, no, I really appreciate that. Like honestly, it's been crazy, like listening to people's stories and like what they've gotten from this group and what they've gotten from my content. And I'm like I said, like I'm here to serve you guys. So if you guys ever want to tap into me, Ben, any of our podcast guests, this is where to do it, man. And it's like I want to give you more free shit than like you're gonna pay for. Like if you go to there's plenty of paid groups out there. Like you could join all those. You can go get paid services. I want to give you it for free. Like that's crazy, right? Like why would I do that? I obviously have my goals, but at the end of the day, yeah, like I'm looking to give you guys the most value as possible. So I really appreciate that, man. Let us know what you think about the podcast. Let us know what you think about the live Dynamite events. Invite some people to both of our stuff. And you guys have a great week. Enjoy.
Bye, guys.
Dude, Ben, thank you, man.